Amanda Harper thought she was just hosting a Sunday dinner to celebrate her hard-earned promotion. 32, independent and finally free from the controlling grip of her upbringing, she believed she'd stepped into the life she fought for. But when dessert was served, her father stood eyes cold and demanded something unthinkable: her house keys. In a single moment, the family she thought she knew revealed a calculated betrayal that had been months, maybe years, in the making. What followed was a psychological war. Forged documents, home invasion, defamation at work, and a relentless campaign to destroy everything Amanda had built. The people who raised her didn't just want to share her success. They wanted to own it. But they underestimated the one thing they never gave her credit for: her strength. Where are you watching this from? Drop it in the comments below and get ready. Because what Amanda did next will make you question everything you believe about family. The steak was still warm when my father looked up from his plate, wiped his mouth with the cloth napkin, and said something that would forever divide the timeline of my life into two halves, before and after. "Amanda," he said, voice clipped and cold, "hand me your house keys." First I thought I had misheard. Maybe he was joking, making some off-color dad quip about borrowing my car or house-sitting while I was on vacation. I waited for the smile. It never came. His face was as blank and hard as stone. Across the table, my mother folded her hands in her lap, eyes focused and calm, nodding silently. Then, as if this were a conversation we'd been having all evening, he continued. "This house belongs to the family now." My stomach dropped. My brain scrambled to process the words. My family, my parents, my brother, were sitting around my dining table eating the meal I had spent hours preparing to celebrate my promotion to senior consultant. My first major step toward building a life on my own terms. And now they were calmly, confidently, claiming the house I had purchased, renovated, and turned into my sanctuary as theirs. I glanced at my younger brother Brandon, who was swirling wine in his glass with an amused smirk. "We've all been thinking about how this space could better serve everyone," he added casually, as though discussing a family cabin or shared timeshare. "It's too much for one person. You've got 2 bedrooms, a backyard, an office. You don't need all this." So I didn't say anything. The weight of betrayal sat heavy on my chest, choking the words in my throat. My fork rested on the edge of my plate, my appetite vanishing like steam from the mashed potatoes. "Linda," my mother finally spoke. Her tone was gentle, rehearsed. "Honey, we've supported you through everything. Your education, your start in life. And now that you're successful, it's only right you give back. This home, it's not just yours. It's part of what we've all built." She was speaking about the emotional debts they believed I owed. Debts I never agreed to. Debts they had apparently decided were due now. "I bought this house," I said quietly, voice barely steady. "With my money. My name is on the deed. The mortgage is mine. I've paid every dime." George's expression darkened. "We're not talking legalities. We're talking about family. You wouldn't be here if it weren't for us. That house exists because of the sacrifices we made." "You're wasting time fighting this," Brandon interjected, sitting back and taking a sip from his glass. "You're going to cave eventually." It was like I had stepped into a parallel universe. One where entitlement overrode law and shared DNA gave people the right to take whatever they wanted from you. They spoke like everything I had built was theirs to divvy up. As if I were a resource to be redistributed. Not a person. Not their daughter. "You don't mean this," I said, my voice cracking with disbelief more than fear. "This is crazy." George's voice rose. Now. And I don't know what took over me in that moment. Maybe it was years of people-pleasing finally boiling over. Maybe it was shock. Or maybe it was survival. I reached into my purse, pulled out my keys, and placed them gently on the table between the apple pie and the wine bottle. I looked at each of them, my father's fury, my mother's rigid calm, Brandon's smug confidence, and I stood up. I didn't scream. I didn't plead. I didn't give them the satisfaction of a meltdown. I just walked out. With only my phone, wallet, and the car keys in my pocket, I stepped outside into the night air, trying to breathe through the panic clawing at my chest. I drove across town to my best friend Emma's apartment, tears streaming down my face, my hands gripping the steering wheel with white knuckles. When she opened the door, one look at me said everything. No questions, just arms around me as I collapsed into her hallway, sobbing harder than I ever had in my adult life. Later that night, as I lay curled on Emma's couch, staring at the ceiling in stunned silence, I kept trying to make it make sense. Maybe it had been a misunderstanding. A power play gone too far. Surely they wouldn't really try to take my home. Then the phone rang. The next morning I answered a call from my mortgage company, and what I heard on the other end made my blood run cold. The voice on the other end of the line was calm, professional. But what he said flipped my stomach inside out. "Miss Harper, this is David Herrera from Summit Mortgage Services. I'm calling to verify some changes recently requested on your mortgage account. We received an inquiry to add 2 co-borrowers, George and Linda Harper, and to update the mailing address on file. Our system flagged the request as unusual, and given that it didn't come through our secure portal, I wanted to speak with you directly." I sat up straight on Emma's couch, heart racing. No, absolutely not. I didn't authorize anything. "I assumed as much," David said. "But I also want to inform you, they provided your social security number and date of birth. That's why the request wasn't immediately rejected." My breath caught. I hadn't given that information to anyone, but of course they would have it. They were my parents. They still had my birth certificate, probably in the same old lockbox they'd kept under the bed since I was a child. "I'm placing an immediate freeze on changes to your account," he added. "You might want to consider filing a police report. This may qualify as attempted mortgage fraud." After I hung up, I sat frozen, the phone still in my hand. Emma placed a warm cup of coffee beside me and waited silently. I told her everything: the dinner, the keys, the phone call. Her response was immediate and unwavering. "You need a lawyer. Today." Her conviction snapped me out of shock. He was right. And she wasn't surprised. Emma had warned me for years. She saw things I didn't, or refused to see. I used to defend my parents as overprotective, old-fashioned. But now, through the lens of this betrayal, so many memories reappeared like puzzle pieces that had never quite fit until now. George had always framed control as guidance. In high school, when I wanted to apply to out-of-state universities, he insisted I stay close, citing safety. Linda went along, echoing his fears, never openly disagreeing. They both guilt me into attending community college and living at home, telling me it was wise and family-centered. But I applied for scholarships behind their backs. And when that acceptance letter came from the University of Michigan with a full ride, I packed up and left. They were furious, but I convinced myself that they'd forgive me in time. I thought independence would mend everything. It didn't. Even after graduation, every big life step brought a subtle challenge from them. When I landed my first job in finance, they questioned the company's stability. When I started saving to buy a home, they insisted I consider buying a condo in their neighborhood, or better yet, build onto their property. Instead, I bought my modest 2-bedroom Craftsman across town. Paid for with my own savings, earned through certifications, long hours, and skipped vacations. It was my badge of survival. A quiet rebellion against the grip they had always tried to maintain. And yet, despite the past, I kept giving them access. I let Linda store antique frames in my living room because she said her attic was too damp. I let George inspect my insurance policies to make sure you're getting a good deal. I handed over a spare key for emergencies. What emergencies, I never asked. I thought it was harmless. Thought I was being a good daughter. Thought they would eventually see me as an adult worthy of autonomy. I should have listened more carefully when Emma told me, "They don't want you to be independent, Amanda. They want to own your success just like they owned your childhood." Now it was too clear to ignore. Later that day, I scheduled a consultation with Barbara Langston, a real estate attorney recommended by Emma's colleague. She listened patiently as I laid everything out: the dinner, the keys, the mortgage attempt. Then she asked a question I hadn't considered. "Have they done anything like this before?" I hesitated. Not to me. But my grandmother. My mother's mother. She was distant toward them, especially in her last few years. I always thought it was just personality conflict. Barbara nodded slowly. "We'll look into it." By the next morning, her team had uncovered something chilling. 7 years ago, my maternal grandmother filed a complaint alleging George and Linda had attempted to transfer her retirement accounts into their names. The complaint was later withdrawn. But the record still existed. I sat back in the chair, dizzy. They had done this before. They had tried it with someone weaker. Someone who didn't have a Barbara or an Emma or a law degree in her corner. Now they were trying it with me. That evening I changed every password. Locked my credit. Cancelled every automatic login. But it wasn't enough. My sense of safety was already fractured. My trust splintered. I felt hunted. And still I didn't know just how far they were willing to go. The answer would come when I returned to my house, escorted by police, and saw what waited for me inside. The first thing I noticed was the curtain swaying. It was slight, but it wasn't wind. The windows were closed. The air was still. Yet something inside me tensed, sharp and immediate. I stood on my own front porch, flanked by Officer Ramirez and another deputy, holding the spare key Emma had driven across town to retrieve from my emergency car stash. I hadn't been home since I left the keys on the dining table. The house that once brought me peace now made my stomach churn. The idea of stepping back inside without knowing what I'd find was terrifying. But I had to know. I had to see if they'd followed through on their threat. Officer Ramirez gave me a reassuring nod. "We'll go in first. Stay right behind me." He turned the key, pushed open the door and immediately called out, "Police. Anyone here?" There was movement. A voice. My father's. "Hold on. No need to shout. We're family." Ramirez stepped in. I followed. And then I saw them. George standing with arms crossed, leaning casually against the doorframe like he owned the place. Linda was in the living room, carefully folding one of my throw blankets. And Brandon, my brother, was halfway up the stairs with a box in his hands labeled Family Files. I froze. Not out of fear but out of disbelief. They weren't just in my house. They were settled. Like this was theirs. The kitchen table was still set from the dinner 2 nights before, dishes crusted with food. The wine bottle remained uncorked on the counter. But the living room had been rearranged. The couch had been moved. My artwork, the prints I'd chosen and hung with care, were stacked near the front door. "Miss Harper," Ramirez said carefully, "can you confirm this is your home?" "Yes," I said, voice hoarse, eyes locked on Brandon. "And they were never given permission to be here." George scoffed. "We're her parents. She left the keys. She knew we'd come." "I left in shock," I snapped. "Because you demanded my house like you were owed it." Ramirez turned to them. "Do any of you have legal documentation showing you have a right to occupy this property?" "We don't need that," George said. "It's a family matter." Linda chimed in, her tone brittle. "Amanda, how could you bring the police into this? This is humiliating." "No," I said, stepping forward. "What's humiliating is walking into my home and finding my brother rifling through my private documents. What are you even doing with that box, Brandon?" He looked down, not even pretending to hide it. "We're organizing. Making room." "For what?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "For us," my father said simply. "This place is too much for one person. We told you already. We're moving in. Brandon will handle the renovations." My chest tightened. I turned to Ramirez. "I want them out. Now." He nodded. "Sir, ma'am, you're being asked to vacate the premises. You do not have legal occupancy. If you do not comply, you may be arrested for trespassing." George muttered something under his breath, but he moved toward the door. Linda stood frozen, eyes locked on mine. "After everything we've done for you," she whispered, "this is how you repay us." Brandon brushed past me, box still in his hands. "You're really showing your true colors now." "I hope so," I replied. Once they were out, Ramirez stayed while I walked through the house. I didn't expect to find it untouched, but what I discovered made my skin crawl. My birth certificate was missing from the drawer I always kept it in. So was my social security card. My grandmother's jewelry box was gone from the bedroom dresser. Several drawers in my home office had been opened and rummaged through. My laptop was still there, but something about its position told me someone had used it. I turned back to Ramirez. "I'd like to file a report. For trespassing and for stolen personal property." He nodded, making notes. "You should also change your locks immediately." That night, Emma stayed with me while the locksmith worked. We didn't talk much. I was too drained to explain how it felt to lose not just trust, but safety. When he finished, the locksmith handed me a new set of keys. I stared at them in my palm, thinking about how casually I'd given the last set away. Not again. I changed every password, enabled every alert, locked every drawer. But safety wasn't something I could buy or secure with deadbolts anymore. And it would only get worse. The next morning I opened my mailbox to find a torn piece of paper. No envelope. Just 5 words, scribbled in bold, uneven handwriting. Family takes care of its own. The morning after I found the note in my mailbox, I didn't go back to bed. I couldn't. I sat on the kitchen floor, legs tucked against my chest, phone in hand, rereading those 5 words over and over. Family takes care of its own. To anyone else, that might sound like an empty cliché. But to me, it wasn't a message of love or support. It was a warning. A threat. A declaration that what had happened so far was only the beginning. By mid-morning, I was back at my office, bleary-eyed but determined to stay grounded. Work had always been my safe place. My escape. And after everything, I needed that sense of normalcy. But normal didn't last long. It started with a phone call from one of my long-term clients, Tom Willis, a small business owner I'd helped through 2 expansion loans. He sounded hesitant. "Amanda," he said, "I got an email this morning. Said it was from a family member of yours. They were warning me. Said you were going through something personal. That you might not be mentally stable right now." I froze. "Do you still have the email?" He forwarded it. The subject line read, "A concerned family member." The body was vague but calculated, written to raise suspicion without making any definitive accusations. "Amanda Harper has recently displayed alarming behavior. We urge you to reconsider entrusting your finances to someone who may not be in the right frame of mind." The email came from a throwaway address, but I knew exactly who was behind it. I didn't even have time to process it before my office line rang again. This time it was Martin Blake, my boss. "Hey Amanda," he said carefully. "We've received a few inquiries from clients about your situation. Apparently, someone is emailing them under the guise of being related to you." My throat tightened. "I know. I just got one myself." "I figured as much," Martin said. "Just wanted to make sure you were okay. This is out of line. We're going to get legal on this immediately. Our firm has zero tolerance for this kind of sabotage, personal or otherwise." I managed a quiet thank you, though I felt anything but composed. I stepped into the break room, sat down with my hands trembling around my coffee, and texted Barbara. 10 minutes later, I was in her office. Barbara didn't mince words. "This is harassment, Amanda. And it's escalating." She added the email to the thickening file of documented threats, unauthorized access attempts, and now, defamation. She also contacted the company's legal counsel to coordinate efforts in case the attack bled further into my professional world. But the psychological toll was already creeping in. That night, as I lay in bed, phone face down on the nightstand, I couldn't stop the thoughts from spiraling. What if a potential client Googled me and found lies instead of facts? What if my hard-earned credibility evaporated under the weight of whispered rumors? And worse, what if no one believed me? The next morning brought more. A voicemail from a number I didn't recognize. "George, you're making a big mistake, Amanda. We're your family. We have rights. What's yours belongs to all of us. That house. Your success. We built it. You're not going to win this by lawyering up." I forwarded the message to Barbara. She responded within minutes. "We'll include this in the restraining order hearing. It strengthens our case. But we may need to move quickly to file for defamation and digital harassment. They're no longer just trying to take your house. They're trying to destroy your life." Emma sat across from me that evening, helping me sift through every account, every online profile. We locked down my social media. We changed security questions. We enabled 2-factor authentication on everything. But even with all those steps, the unease didn't lift. Because now the attacks weren't just coming from behind closed doors. They were out there in the world. Poisoning my name, tainting my work, sowing doubt where I had built trust. And the deeper realization was this: they didn't care who they hurt or how far they pushed. They wanted access, control, ownership. And I had dared to say no. That defiance had made me the enemy. Barbara and I moved fast. She filed the motion for a full restraining order and notified the court of the digital attacks. Martin backed me fully, offering personal time off and assigning a company attorney to help manage the professional damage. But I wasn't done. If they wanted to drag me into the public eye, they'd do it in front of a judge. On record. With evidence. Because the next time we met, it wouldn't be at a dinner table. It would be in court. The courtroom smelled like old wood and tension. Every sound echoed, heels tapping, papers rustling, a cough from the gallery. I sat beside Barbara at the petitioner's table, my hands folded tightly in my lap, trying to appear calm. But inside I was buzzing with a storm of anger, fear, and something sharper: purpose. Across the room sat George, Linda, and Brandon. My father wore a wrinkled suit that still carried an air of arrogance. My mother clutched a tissue and stared at the floor, her grief as carefully curated as her outfit. Brandon leaned back, arms crossed, trying too hard to appear bored. Their attorney, a silver-haired man named Westfield, looked as though he'd coached them on every tear and sigh. Judge Elena Martinez entered with quiet authority, and the room snapped into stillness. She glanced at the documents before her, adjusted her glasses, and looked directly at me. I understand we are here to review a petition for a permanent restraining order against 3 members of the Harper family. Ms. Harper, your counsel may proceed. Barbara stood with the kind of confidence that made me grateful I'd found her. Your Honor, what began as a familial disagreement over perceived entitlement has escalated into a pattern of harassment, defamation, and attempted financial fraud. We intend to show evidence of unauthorized attempts to access Ms. Harper's mortgage account, digital defamation targeting her career, and illegal occupancy of her home without consent. She presented everything in sequence: the mortgage company's report of attempted co-borrower additions, the emails sent anonymously to my clients, the threatening voicemail from George, the police report documenting trespass, and finally the newest piece, what Barbara called our coup de grace. Your Honor, she said, pressing a small device onto the evidence table. This is an audio recording from a smart assistant device inside Ms. Harper's home. It captured a conversation between the respondents the day after they were asked to leave the property. He clicked play. George's voice filled the room, low and blunt. We'll go in while she's at work. Clear out the files, take anything that links the house to her directly. She'll have no proof. Then Linda's voice. Don't forget the birth certificate. That'll help when we talk to the bank again. Brandon's reply was casual, almost cheerful. Don't worry. I've got the list. Judge Martinez didn't blink. When the recording stopped, the room was silent. Westfield rose. Your Honor, we believe this is a family matter gone awry. These conversations, while perhaps poorly worded, were never acted upon. Barbara didn't let it stand. Your Honor, the respondents were found in the house 2 days later with personal files in their possession, having already removed critical identification documents. Their intent is clear. And intent matters. George stood abruptly. We were trying to protect her. She's impulsive. Always has been. That house is too much for her. The judge's gaze sharpened. Mr. Harper, sit down. And let your counsel speak for you. He obeyed, barely suppressing a scoff. Linda dabbed her eyes. She was always difficult. Always needed guidance. I bit back a retort. Then came Brandon's testimony. When asked about the files he was carrying, he shrugged. They were family papers. We were organizing. Judge Martinez leaned forward. Tax returns with Ms. Harper's name and social security number are not community scrapbooks, Mr. Harper. That's private information. Do you understand that? Brandon's jaw tightened. He nodded, unwilling to speak further. After reviewing all the evidence, the judge folded her hands. Her voice was steady. There is a concerning pattern of behavior here. This court does not take restraining orders lightly. However, the combination of unauthorized financial access, physical trespass, digital harassment, and recorded statements suggesting planned identity fraud compels the court to act. She looked at me. Ms. Harper, your petition is granted. The respondents are ordered to remain at least 500 feet from your home, workplace, and place of worship. This order will be effective for 90 days pending review. Any violations will be subject to criminal penalties. The gavel came down once. Final. Unmistakable. George exhaled sharply, rising to his feet. You'll regret this, he muttered as they turned to leave. I didn't flinch. Barbara placed a hand on my arm. You did it. And I had. Legally, I had drawn the line. But as I stepped out into the hallway, my phone buzzed with a new email. Subject line, Family First, let's talk. It was from a law firm representing my parents. They were requesting a mediation. A chance to reconcile. A chance to rewrite the story. And I knew as clearly as I knew anything. This wasn't about peace. It was a new tactic in the same war. The invitation to mediation arrived in a cream-colored envelope, hand-delivered by a courier. The envelope was heavy, its paper thick and smooth, clearly meant to convey professionalism, dignity, and calm. But the weight of it sat like a stone in my palm. Inside was a letter from Patricia Wong, a mediation attorney hired by my parents. The language was neutral, deliberate. Your parents and brother wish to resolve this matter amicably. They hope to restore family bonds and find mutual understanding. A mediated meeting at a neutral location with legal counsel present has been proposed to discuss potential paths forward. I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. But after discussing it with Barbara and more importantly with Dr. Levin, my therapist, I agreed to attend. Not because I believed it would fix anything, but because I needed to hear what they were really after. And I needed to say what I had never been allowed to say. The meeting was held at a private dining room in a quiet restaurant downtown. Nothing dramatic. No courtroom, no judge. Just one long wooden table for chairs on each side. A pitcher of water, untouched glasses, silence so thick it felt staged. George and Linda sat across from me. Brandon beside them, sullen and silent. Their new attorney, Patricia, gave me a polite nod as Barbara and I entered. I chose the seat directly across from my mother. They all looked older. Or maybe just smaller. The confidence they'd exuded during court had faded, replaced by something more restrained, more calculated. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," Patricia began, her voice even and warm. "This isn't a legal negotiation. It's a chance to speak openly without escalation. The goal is to listen." George was first to speak. "We never wanted things to get this far. We were trying to help." "Help?" I said, keeping my tone steady. "By taking over my mortgage? Breaking into my house? Spreading lies about me at work?" Linda's hands fluttered in her lap. "That wasn't our intention. We misunderstood the boundaries." Barbara raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Brandon let out a short laugh. "You're acting like we broke into a bank. It's a house. Our house." There was. So. George leaned forward. "We thought maybe we could try therapy. As a family. Work through this. Rebuild trust." I took a breath, measured and slow. "If we're talking about rebuilding, then here's what it would require." I pulled out the printed list I had typed the night before, folded in thirds. 1. Full acknowledgement of everything you did. No softening the language. No calling it misunderstanding or miscommunication. You attempted fraud. You broke into my home. You tried to damage my career. 2. Individual therapy. Each of you. Before any group sessions. 3. My home, finances, and professional life are no longer open for discussion. Ever. Those doors are closed. Linda's face stiffened. George's eyes narrowed. Brandon looked away. Patricia cleared her throat. "That's quite a list." "It's the minimum," I said. "If you can't respect those boundaries, then we don't move forward." George leaned back, arms crossed. "So you get to dictate the terms now." I didn't blink. "I get to set boundaries. You get to choose whether you can honor them." Linda's voice cracked. "You're our daughter. And I always will be. But that doesn't give you the right to harm me. You've confused love with control for so long, you can't tell the difference anymore." There was no yelling. No accusations beyond what needed to be said. Just the truth laid bare between us. They didn't respond. Not really. Patricia ended the session by saying they'd consider my proposal. But their faces said everything. To them, I was still the ungrateful child who had turned her back on the family. As Barbara and I left the restaurant, I felt lighter. Not because anything had changed, but because I had been clear. I had faced them without flinching. 2 days later, a letter arrived. Not from Patricia. From Linda. Handwritten. It thanked me for attending the mediation. Then it said in looping script that if I couldn't forgive and forget without conditions, then maybe we needed a break. It ended with, "When you're ready to come back to this family without legal walls between us, you know where to find us." I folded the letter once and placed it in a drawer. I knew exactly where they were. But I also knew I wasn't going back. They didn't want reconciliation. They wanted access. So I did what I should have done months ago. I turned my focus to rebuilding. Not just my home, but the life they had tried so hard to control. I didn't move out. I moved in, fully, deliberately on my own terms. After months of tension, betrayal, and courtroom showdowns, I realized reclaiming my house wasn't enough. I had to redefine it. strip it of every trace they had left behind. Because no matter what paperwork said, the house hadn't felt like mine since the night I handed over the keys at that cursed dinner table. The renovations began quietly. New locks had already gone in, but now I replaced every doorknob. Repainted the living room walls from warm cream to a soft sage green. The kitchen backsplash, once the subject of my father's criticism, was demolished and rebuilt with subway tiles I chose without input, without second-guessing. I replaced the dining table where it had all fallen apart. Donated it. Got a round one instead, no sharp edges. A fresh beginning down to the screws. Emma helped when she could, bringing over food and blasting music while we painted. We laughed. Real laughter. And for the first time in weeks, my body felt something close to peace. Not joy, not yet. But peace. I met Jason during one of those long hardware store runs. He was in line behind me, arms full of soil and planters, and made a comment about my equally ridiculous pile of paint rollers and switch plates. We chatted. He was a landscape architect, recently moved from Oregon. We grabbed coffee the next day and then again. I didn't tell him my story right away, just that I was renovating. That it was personal. He didn't push. When I finally did open up weeks later, he listened. So, no advice, no judgment. Just presence. And something in me exhaled for the first time in what felt like years. By then, I had joined a support group for adults navigating family estrangement. The first session was awkward, hearing strangers talk about childhood wounds and toxic patterns. But quickly the room became a lifeline. Every story shared made mine feel less isolating, less bizarre. I wasn't alone. I wasn't wrong. I wasn't broken. Through it all I kept working. Martin stood by me and the storm around my name slowly quieted. Clients returned. My inbox no longer made my heart pound. I began mentoring younger colleagues, especially those balancing family pressure and professional ambition. One afternoon, a new consultant confided in me, "You make me feel like I don't have to choose between success and self-respect." That one line carried more healing than she knew. But my family wasn't finished. Brandon started appearing again. Not directly. Not confrontationally. His present. His truck parked at the end of my street. Once outside the grocery store. Once across from my gym. Always far enough away to skirt the restraining order but close enough to be noticed. I filed a report each time. Nothing could be done unless he stepped closer, but the message was clear. He was watching. Then came the notes. Left in my mailbox. Slipped under the windshield wiper. One was a torn scrap from a photo of me as a child, the edges charred. Another read, "Blood doesn't forget." The worst, a single word scrawled in red ink, "Traitor." I brought everything to Barbara, who logged each incident, advising patience and preparation. "Sometimes," she said, "they escalate because they've realized they've lost. It's desperation, not power. Keep the cameras on. Keep the records straight." I did. I added motion sensor lights. Replaced the fence in the backyard. Changed my email. Deleted old social media. Bit by bit, I erased every entry point they had once used to reach me. Jason stayed beside me without flinching. We planted lavender in the front yard. He helped me build a raised bed for vegetables in the back. One morning, standing on the porch with our coffee, he said, "This house finally feels like it's yours." And it did. It smelled different. Lived in. Safe. Every light fixture, every coat of paint, every potted plant was a declaration. "I am not yours to own." But then a notice arrived. A court summons. One last hearing. Barbara's letter said it plainly. The final push for a permanent restraining order. One that would include provisions for defamation and attempted identity theft. We had the evidence. The threats. The emails. The recordings. The pattern. This wasn't about a house anymore. It was about drawing the line once and for all. This time I wouldn't walk into that courtroom afraid. I'd walk in knowing the truth was mine, and I was ready to speak it. The courthouse felt different this time. Less like a battleground, more like a threshold. I arrived early, dressed in the same navy suit I'd worn the first time, polished, grounded, ready. Barbara met me in the hallway, her binder thick with evidence. She offered a calm, steady nod. "You've done the work," she said. "Now let the truth speak for itself." We stepped inside. George, Linda, and Brandon were already seated. George wore the same suit as before, though it hung looser now. Linda's hair was grayer, her posture more fragile than defiant. Brandon sat stiffly, eyes darting everywhere but mine. Their attorney was new. Westfield hadn't returned. Judge Martinez presided again. Her presence was firm, no nonsense, commanding silence the moment she entered. After a brief review, she gestured for Barbara to begin. This time there was no need for long context. Barbara presented the updated case with surgical precision. First, the continued harassment. The surveillance footage showing Brandon's truck parked near my home multiple times. The timestamps aligned with his known work schedule, making the pattern unmistakable. Second, the threatening notes. We displayed photos of each one, accompanied by police reports filed the day they appeared. Third, the digital defamation. Barbara presented screenshots of anonymous emails sent to clients and colleagues, now traced back to my parents' IP address. The court's forensic tech verified the data trail. And finally, the voicemail George had left where he said, "You're making a mistake. We have rights to what's yours." As Barbara paused, Judge Martinez turned to their table. "Do you dispute the origin of these communications?" Their new attorney stood. "Your Honor, my clients acknowledged the messages were inappropriate, but they stemmed from concern, not malice." Judge Martinez raised an eyebrow. Concern does not justify harassment, fraud, or defamation. And the law does not recognize emotional entitlement as a defense. Then it was their turn to speak. George leaned forward, hands folded, attempting measured contrition. "We just wanted to help Amanda see the bigger picture. She's been distant. We were trying to reconnect." Linda's voice trembled. "She shut us out. We panicked. Maybe we went too far, but we're her family. What are we supposed to do, just walk away?" Judge Martinez remained silent for a beat too long, then responded with clarity that cut through every excuse. "Yes. That is exactly what you're supposed to do when someone tells you no." Then she turned to Brandon. "Mr. Harper, are you aware that approaching Ms. Harper's residence, even from a legal distance after a court order is issued, constitutes harassment when accompanied by notes and threatening gestures?" He stared at his shoes. "I was checking on her, making sure she was okay. Despite her request that you stay away?" He hesitated. "Family trumps court orders." A collective exhale passed through the courtroom. Judge Martinez sighed, removed her glasses and looked directly at me. "Ms. Harper, based on the sustained pattern of harassment, unauthorized access to personal information, and attempts to undermine your professional credibility, the court hereby grants a permanent restraining order. The respondents are prohibited from any form of contact, digital or physical, for a period of no less than 5 years, subject to renewal." She glanced at George. "Any future attempts to breach this order will be met with criminal charges." Brandon scoffed and stood suddenly, his chair screeching behind him. "This is all bullshit," he snapped. "She turned her back on us. She owes us everything." Judge Martinez didn't even blink. "Bailiff, remove Mr. Harper. He is now in contempt of court." Brandon's protests echoed as he was escorted out. I watched him go, not with triumph but with a sadness so deep it no longer hurt. Just an echo. George and Linda sat frozen, stunned into silence. The image of them, diminished, angry, unreachable, stayed with me as I walked out of the courtroom for the last time. Barbara met me outside. "It's done," she said. "This chapter at least. It should have felt like victory. And in some ways it did. But more than that, it felt like clarity." 3 months later, I hosted a housewarming party. The kitchen was finally finished, just the way I'd envisioned. The same open concept Brandon once claimed, only now it belonged to me entirely. Friends filled the space with laughter. Emma brought a house-shaped ornament that read, "Amanda's Haven." Jason helped string lights across the backyard, where lavender bloomed beside the raised beds we'd planted together. As the sun set, I stepped inside, looked around, and breathed. This house was mine. But more importantly, so was my life. I had protected it, redefined it, and for the first time I wasn't just surviving. I was free. Some stories end quietly with a slow fade into peace. Mine ended with a gavel, a locked door, and the steady reclaiming of everything I nearly lost. Not just my home, but my voice, my worth, and the right to choose who holds space in my life. It wasn't just a legal battle. It was the breaking of generational chains disguised as love, and the painful awakening to the truth that family without respect is only blood. There are still days I wonder what might have been if they'd chosen healing over control. But those thoughts no longer hold power. Because now every corner of my life reflects choice. Not fear, not obligation, not guilt. And that's a freedom no one can take from me again. Have you ever had to choose between your well-being and someone you were told to never walk away from? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. If this story resonated with you, please like, share, and subscribe for more true journeys of resilience, clarity, and healing. Your story matters too, and you're not alone.